Thank you all very much. Thank you. Now, when we think of Egypt, we might think of the pyramids, a modern functioning state, and more recently a people who bravely risked their lives to get rid of a tyrant. It is therefore a shock to discover that the latest available figures show that more than 90% of Egyptian women have suffered female genital mutilation, the highest rate anywhere in the world. Since an official ban on the practice in Egypt 5 years ago, there's been a determined campaign to persuade people not to mutilate their daughters. However, campaigners fear that the continuing political upheavals could set them back. Sue Lloyd-Roberts has been to investigate, and you may find her report disturbing.
It is scarcely believable, as you mingle among the evening shoppers in Cairo, with the appearance of any other cosmopolitan city anywhere in the world, that nearly all the women here have been deliberately mutilated. New figures due out later this year are expected to show a decline in the number of female mutilations 4 years after the ban was introduced. But they'll still indicate that a majority of women in this country suffer huge physical, psychological and unjustified pain and are denied what most women would regard as a normal sex life. Upper Egypt, where the landscape along the Nile hasn't changed in centuries. Nor has the tradition which believes that a family's honour is dependent on the removal of those parts of a girl's body that might arouse sexual desire. To challenge such a belief in an environment in which sex is never spoken about in public, campaigner Naveen Razmi goes from house to house.
Talking to people is what we do. We have to know how to reach out to people and how to discuss this issue with them.
It's a village where Muslims live side by side with Christians, and both communities practice FGM.
I've had problems in my sexual relationship with my husband because of it. And so when Naveen explained about the health complications and how it's not part of religious faith, I was convinced. I now don't want my daughter circumcised.
But the Muslim mother next door is not. The two older girl cousins have been mutilated, and her 11-year-old daughter will be next.
I
will remove this part of her body instead of letting her play with herself. Or she might ask a boy to touch this part and she might enjoy it. It might be a stranger or even one of her male cousins. So this will protect her, and when she feels the pain of it, she'll be more careful about this part.
Often it's the husband's family who demand it. Mothers say they can't get their daughters married without it.
No one comes and checks. These days the midwife just arrives secretly, does it, and leaves in a hurry so as no one sees her, because it is illegal.
But we found nothing secretive about the village midwife.
Circumcision is healthy for girls. I know this. Purified girls grow taller and get marriage proposals, but unpurified girls stay short and stubby. Some women say they won't have their daughters purified when the social worker is around. They humour her until she leaves, and once she is gone, they come to ask me to circumcise their girls. I have her mother, her aunt or neighbour hold her while I cut her. It doesn't take a minute. I cut 3 parts. I cut the lower parts first so the blood doesn't run down from the upper part. And after I show the 2 cut parts to the girl's mother, I cut the upper part.
Do you enjoy your work?
I love it, like my own eyes, because I need the money. Take me to prison if you want to. Take me anywhere, but I will keep circumcising girls. I want the money.
And so why doesn't Naveen, who works for a local NGO and gets financial support from UNICEF, simply take the woman to a police station?
Who are we going to report to? In police stations, we will report to an officer who believes in the custom and is probably doing it to his own daughters.
Without support from the authorities, campaigners take the message into the classroom. They engage children at a young age to gain their confidence, and when they're older, they talk about FGM. Salma says she's saved more than 100 girls this way. She's motivated by what happened to her.
They did my elder sister first. I was the middle and the youngest was after me. The midwife came with 2 large accomplices and bound me by my hands and feet so she could hold me down. I tried to hit one of them but couldn't. I was only 10. I screamed, but they gagged me so my little sister would not hear the pain. Afterwards I screamed all day. I spent 2 days recovering. It was terrible. To this day, I shudder from the memory.
She invited 13-year-old Saba, whose older sister had already been mutilated, to her teaching.
I spoke to my mum and told her everything I learned from Salma. I spoke to her politely to convince her. Luckily, it worked. There are no actual benefits to circumcision. People just think that way. Once I explained to her the harm it causes, she was convinced.
Because people believe it's part of their faith, campaigners appeal to local religious leaders for help. They try, they say, but it's difficult to change people.
The main challenge is tradition. In the Old Testament, when God ordered Abraham to circumcise, it was only for boys. There was no mention of female circumcision. But in our tradition, circumcision is performed on girls as well. We pray that God will help us in reaching people with the truth.
The local imam explained that Muslim leaders are trying hard to get the message heard.
We are now spreading the word against FGM because it's against our faith for this part of a woman to be seen by anybody else. We're telling people not to do it.
It appeared that the local religious leaders were in agreement until the arrival of a more senior cleric. Refusing to look at me, he gave his view.
The Prophet did it, peace be with him. So this thing is legalized by Islamic law.
Egypt's most senior religious figure issued a fatwa against FGM a few years ago, and yet those below him contradict one another. No wonder the people are confused. Whatever stand religious leaders might take, female genital mutilation is a millennia-old tradition here. There's evidence that it was practiced during the time of the pharaohs, well before either Christianity or Islam arrived in Egypt. It's built firmly into the national psyche, and those who are trying admit that it'll be very hard to remove.
It's like a needle. By this needle, they can bring the clitoris a little bit outside to cut it, and the other 2 needles, they put one on this labia and another one the other labia, and they just stretch it out so they can cut it. Yeah. The cutting close the
Dr. Randa runs an NGO attempting to eradicate FGM in the suburbs of Cairo. She says about half the cases she comes across are type 1, the removal of the clitoris, and the rest are type 2, removal of the clitoris and of the labia. Both procedures carry risks.
Some of the immediate complications include bleeding, infections from using unsterile tools in carrying out circumcision, severe pain which may lead to body shock, All of these can cause the girls to die. We witness complications later on. Female circumcision means these women never reach orgasm during sexual intercourse. This results in the woman withdrawing from sex with her husband, which causes problems in the marriage.
Paradoxically, she explains, deaths have increased since the practice was banned.
In some cases, parents don't seek medical care, even if their daughters suffer severe complications, in which case it becomes too late for us to save their lives. Girls die because their parents are too afraid of prosecution.
But how much longer will parents be afraid of the law? We were told that a crowd gathered outside a house where we'd been filming after we left and yelled abuse at the women, saying they shouldn't talk to foreigners about such traditional matters. A wave of xenophobia and traditionalism has engulfed Egypt since the fall of the Mubarak regime.
The fear is that the new parliament will oppose all laws against FGM because some extremists there disagree with some of the laws designed to protect women and children. We're all pretty sure that under this new government and parliament, we'll see a decline in women's and children's rights.
I asked the spokesman for the Salafi party, the most extreme of those parties, whether they would be supporting the campaign against FGM.
This is not a priority. There are more urgent issues involving women. No one will force women to do anything they do not want to do.
So you wouldn't deter a mother who wants to get her underage daughter mutilated?
I have nothing further to say on this matter.
The will of mothers like Olla would therefore be respected, and 11-year-old Raaja will be mutilated.
Sue Lloyd-Roberts reporting there. Well, the International Development Minister, Stephen O'Brien, is in our Salford studio. Minister, that was a pretty harrowing report, as I'm sure you'll agree. I just wondered what you think the British government's role can be in helping stop this.
Well, it's an absolutely critical but neglected issue which deserves global attention, and I salute Sue Lloyd-Roberts for that excellent report and bringing to the attention of a much wider public a very serious issue on which we have been very focused, and the UK people, through the various things that we support, be that UNICEF or the UN Population Fund, are working in many countries where this is still practiced. And to find that Egypt has apparently 90% of their women who have been cut. Equally, we've got similar figures in Somalia. I have myself been to see a wonderful charity in Senegal which has managed to secure about 300 villages now to be female genital mutilation free. And this is all to do with working very hard through the communities themselves, very much led in Africa by community leaders, often men, but above all this is getting into the traditions and the embedded cultures, particularly of women. There's less evidence this is demanded by men. This is more to do with women's perceptions of their daughters being stigmatized.
I just wondered if you see a pretty obvious irony here that Suzanne Mubarak, the wife of the former president, that she was one of those who campaigned against this. They brought this in, and things actually might get worse despite whatever benefits the Arab Spring brings to Egypt.
Well, you're very right in identifying that actually the first ladies of many of these countries are one of the largest sort of role models that we need to make sure are well on board with this campaign, to recognise that in the interest of girls and women's health and rights, that this is a practice which needs to come to an end. And it's the complete abandonment that we're seeking through community action. Clearly the laws have been passed, we see that in Egypt, but it's actually getting this culture and this tradition to be abandoned from within the communities themselves.
And it could, I suppose the point is, it could actually get worse. It could become even more conservative, and people could return to those traditional roots. That was part of what Sue was suggesting there.
Well, there's no evidence as yet to suggest that that's necessarily going to be a very negative consequence of the Arab Spring and the revolution in Egypt. It's clearly been going on both within Muslim and Christian communities. It's been going on for over 2,000 years. And so it doesn't appear to be allied to a religious issue. It's a more culturally embedded issue within society, and particularly amongst women, and particularly this stigma about marriage, where it isn't the husband or husband-to-be who is particularly demanding that women should be cut. It's the mother-in-law who inspects that the girl has been in order to let her son consummate the marriage. So this is within the female communities, which we need to really understand that from their point of view, this is not an act of violence. This is actually in the girl's best interest as they see it. And so we have to really stand up for the rights, to show the choice is available, and to make sure that the right advice through the communities in Africa is working. And the charity I saw in Senegal called Tostan, which we support through the anti-slavery charity, is one which is showing us the way and can strongly encourage us, just as 20 years it took to get rid of Chinese foot binding a century ago.
Well, Minister, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. And our Arab Spring Watch series continues tomorrow when Mark Urban reports from Libya on the eve of the first anniversary of the uprising there.